Chapter 6. When he heard the quail call, he knew their time of waiting would soon be past, for this was no true quail. He could not have told how he knew it. He could not have told how he knew. It was one of those things a man learned, something he absorbed as he lived in the wild country. It was like finding a lost trail in the dark, or one of those prehistoric Indian trails. Oh, excuse me. You could not quite see, but you knew was a trail just the same. He knew they were free of attack during the night. Probably. It was a superstition of many Indian tribes that a warrior slain in the dark must forever wander, lost in the Stygian darkness of the space between the worlds of the living and the dead. Their respite would end with the dawn. But a watch would be kept anyway. There might be skeptics among these Indians, skeptics who ignored the old superstitions. More than once he had been laughed at for being too careful, and had helped to bury some of the men who were not careful. With the first red arrows of the sun, the attack would come out of the desert, for he had seen the dust in the sunset and knew there were more Indians now. He had seen the dust trails against the far blue mountains, hanging like smoke against the distance. The Indians would come out with new day, their dusty brown bodies seeming to spring from the sand itself, and they would vanish as suddenly. Men had died by the dozen in the desert who had never known an Indian was near. He had himself seen a soldier killed by an Indian. The soldier had passed within 20 yards in broad daylight on the open desert. Uneasy with an action, he went to his gear and shifted from boots to moccasins. Sheehan watched him curiously, and Cates told him, I'm going to scout around out there. You're taking a chance. I get around pretty good, Cates said. He went over the rocks and eased himself down at the edge of the ironwood thicket. He took his time, knowing haste could be dangerous, and he settled down on the brush and listened. After a long time he moved, gliding on the silent feet among the rocks, making no smallest whisper of sound. Several times he paused to listen, checking all the night sounds. The rustle of leaves, the scurry of a small animal or lizard, the rattle of a pebble loosened by erosion, these were different sounds than the movement of a man. When he came out of the desert, Jennifer was momentarily frightened. Grant had returned to their saddles for his pipe, and she was alone. To the south, the twin peaks of Papago were dimly visible against the night sky. You frightened me. Kate stopped beside her, looked at the desert and the night. It was very still. The vast country to the south looked like hell with the fires out. So peaceful, he said, and so dangerous. Are there Indians out there? Really, I mean? She asked. There are, but it's so quiet. That's proof enough. The desert has its own small sounds, and when you don't hear them, something is out there warning them to be still. If they're Indians, why did you go out? Looking at the places they'll use for cover when they come to attack. You might have been killed. You were inviting trouble. Yes, I might have been killed. Each of us is in deadly danger every instant from now until we get to Yuma. But I wasn't looking for trouble. Only a fool takes chances. Fools are children who don't know any better. Danger is never pretty. It's never thrilling. It's dirty, bloody, and miserable. It's choking dust, the pain of wounds, and waiting that eats your guts out. Nobody but a fool or some crazy kid goes hunting trouble. It's different when you meet it face to face on a dark night than when you read of it in a book. All this talk of people who look for adventure is from people who have had no experience. He dropped his cigarette. Your father knows. He lived through it, trying to make this country safe for you to grow up in. You don't approve of me, do you? She said. What is there to approve of? You are beautiful, of course, yet you resent the very things that made life easy for you. You resent your father. From the summit of the molehill of your Eastern education, you judge the mountain of the obstacles your father faced. You, he turned away from her, are like the froth on beer. You look nice, But you don't mean anything. He walked to the fire, angry with himself for saying things he had no right to say, for venturing opinions that were none of his business. Again, he did not know Jim Fair, but he knew a little of any man who came to the country like this when Jim Fair came, who stayed and who built something from nothing. It took strength, character, and a kind of dogged determination that was wholly admirable. It also took fighting ability and, above all, judgment. He crouched by the fire and ate the slice of beef Junie Hatchet brought to him between two thick slices of bread. He ate hungrily, carefully not to look into the fire. Staring into fires was reserved for tenderfeet or some civilized worlds. A man who looks into a fire sees nothing when he turns quickly to look into the dark, and his momentary blindness may cost his life. Grant Kimbrough came down from the rocks with Jennifer. She looked angry, and Logan Cates grinned wryly, knowing that it was himself at whom she was angry. "Find any Indians?" Kimbrough asked, and there was an edge of sarcasm in his tone. "I wasn't looking for any." Sergeant Sheehan joined them at the fire, and the light from the flames caught the scattered silver in his hair. "How many do you figure, Cates?" "Anywhere from 20 to twice that number, not more than 50. "How can you estimate?" Kimbrough asked. "Apaches never travel in big bunches. They live off the desert, and there's never food or water enough for a big bunch. 9 out of 10 war parties will number from 10 to 30 warriors. Cherupatai could never get more than 60, and my guess is there are not over 20 or 25 out there." Zimmerman stood by the fire listening. He was a huge, hairy man who had badly needed a shave. His mood seemed surly, and he looked up at Cates with a challenge. "You sure about that Indian?" "Lugo? He's a Pima," he said. Zimmerman threw the remains of his coffee on the sand with a violent gesture. "So he's a Pima," he said angrily. "I heard you say that before. I say he's an Indian, and they're all alike. He should be tied up." "He won't be," Logan Cates spoke wildly. "He's one of our best men." "You say, I say the way to begin this fight is to shoot that greasy mongrel." "Anybody," Cates spoke mildly still, "who lifts a hand against that Indian will answer to me." Zimmerman hesitated, his face ugly. For a moment it was obvious that he wanted to challenge this statement. Sergeant Sheehan interrupted. "That's enough of that, Zimmerman. We're all under the command of Cates. You'll obey orders." "You mean you'd have me court-martialed?" Zimmerman sneered. "Don't take me for a fool. When all this is over, there won't be enough of us left to tell the story. You won't carry any tales, nor will anybody else." Zimmerman walked away to the darkness, and Sheehan looked after him in silence. Beaupre came to the edge of the rocks above. Cates, they're shooting off to the east, mighty far off." He climbed the rocks again and glad to escape the situation at the fire. They listened, but there was no further sound. He seated himself among the rocks near Beaupre and waited for a repetition of the sound, but they heard nothing. Irritably, he considered the situation below. Zimmerman was a dangerous man, unwilling to accept authority, and his remarks to Sheehan, uttered in the tone used, were practically a threat. As if there was not trouble enough with the Indians, there had to be trouble within their own circle. Despite the fact that he had been pursued by a sheriff's posse, Jim Beaupre was a good man, a solid man, definitely a man to have on your side in any kind of a fight. Cates knew his kind from other times and places, for Beaupre was the sort of man who was handy at any job or with any weapon, and he was the sort who would, when the frontier ended, settle down to one of his jobs without fuss or strain. He would be a teamster, a blacksmith, a small rancher, never wealthy but always hard-working. And what of you, Logan Cates?" he asked himself. "Where will you be, and what will you become?" Some day he would be too slow with his gun, would break a leg somewhere in the desert, or lose his canteen too far from water. It had happened to others. It could happen to him. He would never have the ranch he wanted, with a stream of running water and some old oak trees. He would never have the time to do the reading he wanted. His father had been a great one to read. He had been reading the night Dave Horn shot him through the window. Only Dave Horn had reckoned without Logan, who was 16 at the time, but fully aged in the six-shooter. Logan dropped Horn with a bullet through the skull before he got out of the yard. That shooting bothers me, Beaupre interrupted. That shooting bothers me, Beaupre interrupted, his thinking. Somebody's in trouble out there. There was nothing anyone could do, so they sat tight, waiting for further shooting or some evidence of movement. Kimbrough came up into the rocks, and Lonnie Foreman followed. Several minutes passed, and then suddenly far off in the night, but rapidly coming nearer, they heard the sound of running hooves. Somebody was hunting a hole, and coming fast. There was a shot, closer than they had expected, for they all saw the stab of flame in the night, and then other shots. The horse came with a rush, leaping over the rocks, a led horse following. The horse came like the black rush of doom. Nostrils distended, the horse skidded to a halt in their midst, and a woman slid to the ground, a heavy old-style Remington pistol in her hand. She was a fat, heavy woman with a wide face and a smile to fit, and she glanced around swiftly as she touched the ground. Despite her escape, there was neither fear nor relief in her eyes, just a swift calculation of the situation. When she spoke, which was immediately, her voice was hoarse, hard, and cheerful. "Well, slap me with a silver dollar if this isn't something like it. 10 minutes ago I'd have sold my hide for a phony peso." She glanced around again. "Boys, I'm Big Maria out of Kansas City by way of Wichita, Abilene, and El Paso, and I glad to see you. Has anybody got a drink?" That was chapter 6. Last Stand at Papago Wells. Love you, God bless.